What is my girlfriend's name? We'd been dating for 8 months and I still didn't know her name. I was too drunk when we met to care and just saved her number as Red Dress Girl. Now it was way too late to ask. The first few weeks I kept waiting for her to say name, but she never did. I tried the Starbucks trick, and when they asked for a name, she said Jessica. Finally, I thought I'd solved it. But the next day she told them Amanda, and the day after that it was Sophie. When I asked her about it, she said she didn't like strangers yelling her real name, so she always gave fake ones. I looked for mail at her apartment, but everything was addressed to current resident or valued customer. Her electric bill was paperless and auto-paid from an account she said her dad had set up years ago. When packages arrived, they just had her apartment number on them. She said she used some abbreviation when ordering online because her name was too long for most forms. Her friends all called her different things like babe and honey and girl, like everyone was in on some conspiracy. When I asked one friend what my girlfriend's actual name was, she laughed and said, "You're so funny," and changed the subject. I started to wonder if the friend even knew. Something cold settled in my stomach at that thought. I tried to get her driver's license when we went to a bar, but she said she didn't have one because she grew up in New York where nobody drives. She showed the bouncer something on her phone that he accepted, but when I asked to see it, she said the battery had just died. We went to 5 different bars over the next month, and she never once showed physical ID. I suggested we take a trip somewhere tropical so she'd need a passport. She got excited and started planning, but then said her passport had expired and the renewal process was backed up for months. When I offered to help with the paperwork, she said her birth certificate was at her parents' house in another state and they were traveling in Europe so she couldn't get it. At restaurants, I'd make reservations under my name, then pretend I forgot and ask her to check if she had one. She'd just tell them we were looking for a table for 2 and they'd seat us anyway. When hosts asked for her name, she'd point at something on the menu and start asking questions until they got distracted. It was almost like she'd practiced it. I tried getting romantic and asking what her grandmother called her as a child. She said she'd had so many nicknames she couldn't remember them all. When I asked what teachers called her in school, she said she'd been homeschooled and her mom just called her Sweetheart. Every story somehow avoided her actual name. Her credit cards just said valued member, which she claimed was a privacy thing her bank offered. Her gym membership was under some corporate account from an old job. Her laptop had no name on the user account, just a smiley face emoji. Even her Netflix profile just said me, and when I asked about it, she said she thought it was funny. I looked through her yearbooks when she was in the shower, but her pictures had been cut out of every single one. She said her ex had done it in a jealous rage years ago. The one photo that remained showed her, but the name underneath had been covered with whiteout. She said her ex was seriously disturbed and changed the subject. I started getting desperate and suggested we get married as a joke to see what she'd say. Instead, she got really excited and started planning our future together. When I asked what name she'd want on the wedding invitations, she said, "Let's just do something simple like, join us for our celebration." I found her college diploma in a drawer, but the name section was water-damaged and completely illegible. She said a pipe had burst in her first apartment and destroyed a bunch of important documents. The degree and university were perfectly clear, but the single line with her name looked like it had been specifically targeted by water. I tried to be clever and said we should practice signatures for our future wedding. She drew elaborate loops that could have been anything. When I asked her to write it in print, she said she'd always preferred cursive. When I asked her to spell it out, she got a phone call and never came back to it. At this point, I'd started to wonder if maybe she was in witness protection or hiding from someone. But she posted on social media constantly and had hundreds of friends and lived a completely normal life. She just somehow never said or wrote her actual name. After almost a year together, I got an invitation to a friend's wedding and had to fill out the RSVP card. She handed it to me, and I stared at the line where I was supposed to write in her name. "Why don't you fill it out?" I lied. "I'm in the middle of something." My heart was pounding. This was my chance. But she stared me down and said, "No, I want you to do it." I froze, my mouth going dry. She was going to make me admit that I didn't know her name. And I had no idea how I was going to get out of this one. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. The pen felt like it weighed 50 pounds in my hand as I stared at that blank line on the RSVP card. My girlfriend sat across from me at our kitchen table, watching me with this weird little smile that made my stomach twist into knots. Her eyes stayed locked on mine, and I suddenly realized she'd been waiting for this exact moment all along. My hands started shaking so bad I had to grip the pen tighter just to keep it steady. The apartment felt way too quiet except for the tick of the wall clock and my own breathing getting faster. I could feel sweat starting to form on my forehead even though it wasn't hot. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms, still watching me with that knowing look. I tried to think of something clever to say, but my mouth felt like sandpaper. The RSVP card sat there between us like a bomb about to go off. Finally, I just wrote "and guest" on the line where her name should go and slid the card across the table. The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees as she picked up the card and stared at what I'd written. Her smile disappeared completely, and she set the card down without saying anything. The silence stretched on so long I started counting my heartbeats just to have something to focus on. She stood up and walked to the window, keeping her back to me while I sat there feeling like the worst boyfriend ever. I could see her shoulders tense up and her hands gripping the windowsill hard enough to turn her knuckles white. After what felt like forever, she walked past me to the bedroom and closed the door behind her. Later that night, while she slept, I grabbed my phone and texted Ronan about the whole crazy situation. I typed out this long message explaining how I'd been dating someone for almost a year without knowing their actual name. At first, he just sent back laughing emojis thinking I was messing with him like usual. When I kept insisting it was real, my phone started ringing and his name popped up on the screen. I answered and spent the next hour explaining everything while he kept interrupting with questions I couldn't answer. The next morning, I made breakfast while she sat at the table scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. I set down her coffee and took a deep breath before sitting across from her. "I need to know your name for the wedding," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She set down her coffee cup super carefully like it might break and looked me straight in the eyes. "Not like this," she said quietly. "Not because you have to fill out a form." That afternoon, we went to our usual coffee shop and I thought maybe I could trick her into saying her name. When we got to the counter, I hung back pretending to check my phone while she went to order. But instead of giving a name, she walked straight to the pickup counter and told them she was picking up a mobile order. She grabbed 2 drinks that were already waiting and handed me mine with this triumphant little smile. I wanted to ask how she'd ordered ahead without me knowing, but decided to drop it for now. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Evie asking for both our full names for the seating chart. She said she needed them by the end of the week and added 3 exclamation points like she always does. My chest got tight as I realized I was running out of time and running out of excuses. I texted back that I'd send the info soon, and then stared at my phone trying to figure out what to do. That night, we decided to check out this new bar that had opened up near her apartment. When we got to the door, the bouncer asked for IDs, and I pulled out my license like normal. She pulled out her phone and showed him something on the screen that he nodded at before waving us through. I tried to peek at what she'd shown him, but she'd already put her phone away and was heading inside. The whole thing took maybe 5 seconds, but left me even more confused about how she kept pulling this off. While she was in the shower the next morning, I searched her entire apartment for anything with her name on it. I checked every drawer, looked through all the mail on her counter, even checked the medicine cabinet for prescription bottles. Everything was addressed to resident or customer, just like always. Never an actual name anywhere. Her laptop was open on the couch, and that same smiley face emoji stared back at me from the login screen. Even her Netflix account just said "me" when I checked the profiles on her TV. I heard the water turn off and quickly sat back down pretending to read my phone. Later that week, I brought up the tropical vacation idea again while we were making dinner together. I mentioned how nice it would be to get away somewhere warm this winter, maybe the Caribbean or Hawaii. She got all excited and started talking about beaches and snorkeling and which islands had the best food. Then her face fell, and she mentioned her passport was still stuck in renewal hell from when she'd applied months ago. She said her birth certificate was at her parents' house in another state, and they were still traveling, so she couldn't get it. The whole thing sounded exactly like the excuse from before, but I just nodded and changed the subject. I finally booked an emergency session with Miranda Klein, a therapist I found online who had good reviews and could see me that week. I sat in her office explaining the whole ridiculous situation while she took notes on a yellow legal pad. Every few minutes she'd raise her eyebrows or tilt her head, but she never interrupted or made me feel crazy. When I finished talking, she set down her pen and asked me why I thought this was happening. I told her I had no idea, but maybe my girlfriend was just really private about personal stuff. Miranda nodded and wrote something down, then asked if I'd tried just asking directly. I laughed because of course I'd thought about that, but how do you ask someone their name after almost a year together without looking like the worst boyfriend ever? She suggested maybe there was a way to be honest about the situation without making it accusatory. That evening, after we'd ordered takeout and were eating on her couch, I decided to try Miranda's advice. I put down my chopsticks and told her how not knowing her name made me feel like I wasn't really part of her life. She stopped eating and looked at me for a long time before reaching over to hold my hand. "There are things about my past that make this complicated," she said softly. I squeezed her hand and suggested a compromise. "If we're going to this wedding together, I need you to tell me privately, just between us." She pulled her hand back and looked away, and I could see her wrestling with something heavy in her mind. After what felt like forever, she said she could give me a nickname to use for the wedding. Something that would sound like it could be short for a real name, but she still wouldn't tell me what it actually stood for. My chest got tight with frustration because this felt like more games when I was trying to have a real conversation about something important. She suggested M, which could be short for Emma or Emily or a dozen other names. I nodded but felt this resentment building up inside me. The next day while she was at work, I spent hours going through every social media account I could find for her. Instagram was just her handle at CityGirl2019 with no real name anywhere. Her Facebook was completely locked down with privacy settings tighter than anyone I'd ever seen. Twitter was the same story with just a username and no personal info visible. Even her LinkedIn, which usually has real names, just showed her initials and current job title. Everything was handle-based with that same careful digital anonymity she'd perfected over who knows how many years. That weekend, Jules and Carrie came over for dinner at her place. While we were eating, I tried to casually bring up college memories, hoping they'd mention what they called her back then. Jules started telling this story about their sophomore year, but when I asked what nickname everyone used for my girlfriend back then, she smoothly switched to talking about their spring break trip to Cancun. Carrie jumped right in with details about the resort and the beaches, and I felt completely managed, like they'd rehearsed this deflection. Her parents called while I was there Sunday afternoon, and she put them on speaker so I could say hi. They were warm and chatty, asking about our weekend plans, and her mom telling this long story about their neighbor's new dog. The entire 20-minute conversation somehow happened without anyone using a single name, just sweetheart and honey and dear flying around. The coincidence felt impossible, and I started wondering if they even knew I didn't know their daughter's name. Monday morning, I went to use her bathroom and noticed a prescription bottle on the counter. When I picked it up, the label had been completely scraped off, leaving just the pharmacy logo and dosage instructions. This wasn't accidental anymore because who scrapes their name off medicine bottles? She was deliberately erasing every trace of her identity from her own apartment. My phone buzzed with another text from Evie asking about the names for the seating chart. She said she really needed them by Friday and added a bunch of stressed emoji. I texted back that I was waiting to confirm our +1 status, even though we'd already RSVP'd yes weeks ago. The guilt of lying to my friend about something so simple made my stomach hurt, but I didn't know what else to do. That night I tried one more time while we were getting ready for bed. I promised I wouldn't write her name down anywhere or tell anyone if she'd just tell me privately. She sat on the edge of the bed and her eyes got glossy like she might cry. "There's painful history involved," she finally admitted. I sat next to her and waited, but she didn't say anything else. I realized this was bigger than just being quirky or private about her name. Thursday night, she fell asleep on the couch after we'd been watching movies. Her phone was right there on the coffee table, and I knew her passcode from watching her type it so many times. I picked it up and started to open it, thinking I could check her mobile wallet for some kind of ID. My finger was on the home button when she suddenly woke up and saw me with her phone in my hand. The look on her face wasn't anger, but this deep betrayal, like I'd just destroyed something between us. "Were you trying to go through my phone?" she asked, and her voice was so quiet it was worse than if she'd yelled. I couldn't even deny it because we both knew exactly what I'd been about to do. She took her phone and went to the bedroom, closing the door behind her. I sat on the couch feeling like the worst person alive for violating her trust like that. I grabbed my phone and texted Ronan asking if I could crash at his place for a few days. He replied within minutes saying his couch was mine and asking if I was okay. I went to our closet and threw some clothes into my gym bag, trying not to make too much noise. She stayed in the bedroom the whole time I was packing, and I could hear her moving around, but she didn't come out. I left a note on the kitchen counter saying I was giving us both space and would be at Ronan's if she needed me. The drive to his apartment took 20 minutes, and I spent the whole time replaying that moment when she caught me with her phone. Ronan opened his door before I even knocked and pulled me inside without asking questions. He made tea while I sat at his kitchen table and finally told him everything about not knowing her name for almost a year. His eyes got wider with each detail, and when I finished, he just sat there processing it all. He didn't judge or make jokes, just let me talk through my confusion about why I'd violated her trust like that. For 3 days, I stayed on his couch going to work and coming back to his place instead of home. She didn't text or call, and I didn't push, though I checked my phone constantly hoping she'd reach out. On the third day, I had my second appointment with Miranda, who I'd started seeing for anxiety weeks earlier. Her office was downtown in this old building with creaky floors, and I sat in the waiting room feeling nervous. When Miranda called me in, I told her about the phone incident and how guilty I felt about crossing that line. She asked me to think about the difference between wanting control and respecting boundaries, which hit me hard. I'd been so focused on my need to know her name that I hadn't considered why she needed to keep it secret. Miranda helped me see that my anxiety about not knowing was making me act in ways that were pushing her away. After the session, I sat in my car in the parking garage and decided to go home and apologize without making any demands. When I got to our apartment, she was sitting on the couch with her laptop and looked up when I walked in. I sat down across from her and told her I was sorry for trying to invade her privacy and that I understood if she was angry. She closed her laptop and her hands were shaking as she set it aside, which made my chest tight. "I legally changed my name 2 years ago," she said quietly. and I could see how much it cost her to share this. She explained that something traumatic had happened with her family, and changing her name was part of starting over. I wanted to ask what happened, but I could see she was already at her limit just telling me this much. She pulled out her phone and showed me an old news article about a court case with all the names blurred out. The details were vague, but it mentioned harassment and threats against family members, which made my stomach drop. She explained this was why she'd had to disappear from her old life and create a new identity to feel safe. I finally understood this wasn't about me or us or trust, but about her actual survival and safety. The weight of what she'd been carrying alone all this time made me feel terrible for adding to her stress. I suggested maybe she could tell me privately, just whisper it once, and I'd never say it out loud or write it anywhere. She looked at me for a long time, and I could see her wanting to trust me, but something was still holding her back. Maybe I could just tell you my first initial and where the name comes from culturally, she offered tentatively. I nodded eagerly, thinking this was progress, but when I started guessing based on her hints, she suddenly panicked. Her whole body tensed up and she pulled back, saying she couldn't do this right now. I realized with horror that I'd turned her trauma into some kind of game and felt absolutely terrible about it. Later that evening, I told her I'd only go to Evie's wedding if she accepted and guessed on everything official. If not, I'd make up an excuse about why we couldn't attend, even though Evie was one of my closest work friends. She looked genuinely surprised that I was prioritizing her comfort over my social obligation to be at this wedding. The next morning, I called Tony directly since he was handling all the RSVP stuff for him and Evie. I explained we needed generic place cards for privacy reasons and offered to help with other wedding tasks in exchange. He sounded confused and asked a bunch of questions, but eventually agreed because he trusted me even if he didn't understand. Then he mentioned that since I was asking for special accommodation, maybe I could help coordinate the catering logistics for the reception. I agreed immediately, just relieved to have found a solution that would work for everyone involved in this situation. Over the next few days, my girlfriend watched how I handled everything without pressuring her for more information about her past. She seemed to relax a bit, and one night while we were cooking dinner, she said she was making a plan. She wanted to tell me on her own terms, but needed a few more days to prepare herself emotionally for it. I told her to take all the time she needed, and that I'd wait as long as it took for her to feel ready. 6 days went by, and each one felt longer than the last as I watched her work through whatever she needed to process. She texted me to come over that night, and when I got there, all the lights were off except for one candle on the coffee table. She took my hands and pulled me down next to her on the couch, and I could feel her shaking even though the room was warm. She leaned close to my ear and whispered something so quiet I almost missed it. 3 syllables that sounded foreign and beautiful, and nothing like any name I'd ever heard. My chest got tight with this mix of relief that I finally knew, and sadness for whatever made her guard it so carefully. She made me promise never to say it out loud in public, or write it down anywhere, or tell anyone else no matter what. I nodded and held her hand tighter, and we sat there in the dark for a long time without saying anything else. She started telling me about her dad, and how he'd been arrested when she was 17 for something she didn't want to get into the details about. The trial went on for months, and reporters started showing up at their house and following her mom to work and waiting outside her school. People sent threats to their home address, and someone spray-painted horrible things on their garage door, and her little brother got beat up at the school because of what their dad supposedly did. The prosecutor said the family might be in danger from her dad's former business partners, so they had to move 3 times in 2 years. She legally changed her name when she turned 18 and moved across the country to start over where nobody knew her family's history. Her mom and brother did the same thing, and now they all had different last names and lived in different states and only saw each other a few times a year. She cried while telling me this, and I held her and promised I'd help keep her secret safe no matter what it took. We worked out this system where I could use her real name when we were completely alone in one of our apartments with the doors locked and curtains closed. Everywhere else I'd stick to pet names or just get her attention without using any name at all. Having these clear rules made us both feel better and somehow closer, even though the whole thing was strange. I went through my phone that night and deleted every screenshot I'd taken of her documents and every note I'd made trying to figure out her identity. My laptop had a whole folder of research I'd been doing, and I wiped it all clean without even looking at it again. Letting go of that need to investigate felt like putting down something heavy I'd been carrying around for months without realizing how much it weighed. The next week, she had a doctor's appointment and asked if I wanted to come with her. At the check-in desk, she gave her legal name to the receptionist, and I just sat there reading a magazine without reacting or commenting on finally hearing it said out loud. In the elevator afterward, she squeezed my hand and thanked me for not making it weird or acting like it was some big moment. I called Evie that afternoon to confirm our place cards would just say guest, and she said that was fine since I'd been helping coordinate all the vendor payments and pickup times. The whole wedding stress that had been building up just disappeared, and we could actually look forward to going and celebrating with everyone. The day of the wedding was perfect weather, and we got dressed up and drove out to the venue feeling relaxed for the first time in weeks. During cocktail hour, I was talking to some work people when someone asked about my girlfriend, and I almost said her name without thinking. I caught myself at the last second and smoothly switched to calling her my partner and pointing across the room where she was chatting with Evie. She must have noticed because she gave me this small, grateful smile that made my chest warm. The reception was beautiful, and after dinner we stepped outside to get some air away from the loud music. She told me how safe I'd made her feel all day by keeping our agreement and not treating her differently, even though I knew her secret now. We found a quiet spot on the patio and slow danced to the muffled music coming through the windows, feeling closer than we'd ever been despite how weird our situation was. The week after the wedding, I called Evie privately to apologize for being difficult about the seating chart stuff. She laughed and said she was just happy we could make it, and that I seemed more relaxed than I had in months, which was true. She mentioned how nice it was to finally meet my girlfriend properly and how good we looked together, which made me smile. My next therapy appointment with Miranda was 3 days later, and I spent most of the session talking about my pattern of crossing boundaries when I got anxious. I told her about the phone snooping incident and how terrible I'd felt when I saw the betrayal on my girlfriend's face. Miranda helped me understand that love doesn't mean knowing everything about someone and that respecting privacy is actually a form of intimacy. She gave me homework to practice sitting with uncertainty without trying to control or investigate my way out of it. I committed to working on this long term because I could see how my need for control had almost ruined the best relationship I'd ever had. That night at her apartment, she pulled out a shoebox from under her bed and showed me the yearbook pages her ex had torn out. The edges were ragged where he'd ripped them, and some had burn marks on them. She explained how he'd shown up at her apartment after she'd broken up with him and destroyed everything with her name on it. He'd poured water on her diploma and scratched her name off every photo he could find. The police had gotten involved, but he'd kept finding ways to contact her through fake social media accounts. She'd changed her phone number 3 times and moved twice before finally deciding to just erase her name completely. Her hands shook as she put the box away, and I understood this wasn't just quirky privacy stuff, but actual survival. We sat on her couch for a long time and agreed to pump the brakes on all the marriage talk we'd been throwing around. The pressure that had been building up between us just melted away, and we could breathe again. She ordered Thai food using her usual fake name, and we watched movies without any weird tension for the first time in weeks. 2 weeks later, Ronan invited us to dinner at his place, and I introduced her as my love, without using any name at all. He didn't ask questions or make it weird, and just welcomed her with his usual warmth. She actually laughed at his stupid jokes and helped him cook while I set the table. After we left, she squeezed my hand in the car and thanked me for not telling him about her situation. I noticed she'd started changing some of her online accounts to just use initials instead of the fake names. Her Instagram changed from some random handle to just K.M, which felt like progress even if I didn't know what the letters stood for. She updated her food delivery apps too and started using just K when ordering coffee. Each tiny step felt huge considering where we'd started from. 3 months passed and we got invited to this house party where everyone had these ridiculous nicknames anyway. People were calling each other Shark and Beans and Princess, so we fit right in without any questions. She was loose and fun in a way I hadn't seen since before the wedding drama started. We played beer pong and she trash-talked the other team while everyone called her Babe, and it felt completely normal. The next morning over breakfast, I told her straight up that if the secrecy started spreading to other parts of our life, we'd need to stop and figure things out. She nodded and said she understood and actually appreciated having clear lines about what was okay and what wasn't. We wrote down some basic rules about what situations needed real names and which ones didn't. Her parents called on video chat a few weeks later, and this time she introduced me by my actual name while they called her Sweetheart like always. Her mom asked about our plans for the holidays, and we made normal conversation without any of the weird, careful dancing around words. They seemed happy she was dating someone stable, and I realized they probably didn't even know I'd been struggling with the name thing. A new wedding invitation showed up in my mail the next month for another college friend getting married. I grabbed a pen and wrote "plus guest" on the RSVP card without even thinking about it. She saw me do it from across the room and smiled but didn't say anything. I mailed it the next day and didn't feel any resentment or frustration about the situation. The whole thing had shifted from this huge mystery I needed to solve to just how we did things as a couple. We went shopping for wedding clothes, and she paid with her anonymous credit card while I handled the stuff that needed names. At the store, she tried on dresses, and the saleswoman kept calling her Hun, which worked perfectly. We found her a green dress that looked amazing and bought it without anyone needing to know who she was. The wedding was at this vineyard 2 hours away, and we drove up early to help set things up. I introduced her to people as my girlfriend, and everyone just rolled with it like it was totally normal. During the ceremony, she held my hand, and we watched our friends exchange vows without any of the stress from Evie's wedding. At the reception, we danced to every song, and she let loose in a way that made me fall for her all over again. People took photos and tagged her with emojis instead of names on social media, which she thought was hilarious. We caught the shuttle back to the hotel and spent the night talking about everything except her name. The trust between us had grown into something solid that didn't need every single detail spelled out to work. Looking back at those 8 months of not knowing felt like a different lifetime, even though it had only been a few months since the crisis. We'd found our rhythm as a couple with weird boundaries but real connection underneath it all. Feels like we just chatted on the couch. I'm grabbing a snack and hitting record again. Come back for the next round.